Hi folks, John Dunn here, RPG freelancer, publisher behind Meliorvia. I am up here today at Immortals Inc. with Mikey.
What is up, John? What a lustrous evening we have here. What are we talking about?
I think we're going to talk about getting outdoors and experience the wild.
Okay, I mean, that sounds very adventurous.
Yeah, and you know what? It is adventurous. It's a little bit of natural history, or maybe magical natural history, brought to us by Paizo for the Pathfinder 2nd Edition game system.
Here we are.
It is Howl of the Wild, and the lead on this is James Case. He was the design lead of a very large team of folks from Paizo. James worked on Fists of the Ruby Phoenix,
yes,
we talked about before, the adventure path.
Yep.
He also worked on the GM core and the player core for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and a whole lot of other stuff for Paizo. This book is spun a little differently than most RPG books. I'm not positive I've read any others that were formatted quite like this, and I really liked it because it's a travelogue. So it is a story told from the perspective of Barenthet Zemendi, who is a lizard folk naturalist.
Wow.
And Barenthet is the person in charge of an expedition to just kind of explore Golarion's wildlife. And he's got an airship that he's piloting across the world called the Zoetrope.
Wow.
And yeah, and it's kind of a cool, almost spelljammery type airship that just floats through the sky. And they're just exploring and looking at the wildlife, the magical wildlife that makes up the world.
A little more advanced than the Goodyear blimp.
Just a touch, yeah,
Okay.
or at least a touch more magical, maybe a little
Okay.
more fantastic. It's got some dragonfly motifs and some other kind of cool elements to
Nice.
it. The first chunk of the book is actually about the Zoetrope and its crew. About 48 pages here, where you get write-ups of each of these NPCs. You don't get game stats for them, but you get personalities and motives and just kind of what their roles are aboard the ship. So you could definitely use them as a crew for the player characters to interact with. And then we get into ancestries because this is a book about the wilds of Golarion. We're looking at some ancestries that have maybe a different idea of what constitutes civilization than our typical RPG races. And those need some special rules. So we get some rules for large and tiny PCs, for situations where player characters might be riding a PC, and rules for aquatic and flying PCs. And those ancestries then that are detailed, all of which have their own sets of ancestry feats, are the Athamaru, which are basically fish people. And we get coral, hopeful, kaleidoscopic, and quilled versions of that, and they're fish people. They're obviously aquatic, right? They spend most of their time underwater.
Yes.
Then we have awakened animals. So these are animals that were used to just be a normal bear or field mouse or whatever, and something happened to them to give them full-on sapience. And so that obviously affects their ability to interact both with their former animal culture out in the wild and with civilization that doesn't include many members of their exact type. For our subspecies here, we get climbing, flying, running, and swimming variants. Then we have centaurs. Centaurs have a budding speaker, fleet-winged, ironed hoof, mule coat, ponygate, and stout-heart variants. So ponygate is a smaller version. So if you do want to play My Little Pony in Pathfinder, here is your option.
Here you go.
All right.
Just when you thought.
Merfolk. So again, an aquatic species. We get abyssal Carcharodon. Carcharodon mean anything to you?
No.
That's the shark version.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, there's a...
Shark people?
Well, they're merfolk, so the bottom half looks like a shark.
Nice.
Right? Yeah, the Carcharodons are
That's gotta
Space
be.
Marine chapter of space sharks in 40K.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Thought you might have heard of them.
Okay, maybe coming
Pelagic, reef, and sailfish versions of merfolk as well. And then minotaurs, where you have a ghost bull, a glacier cavern, little horn, roaming, slab soul, and stalker versions of the minotaur. And finally, the Circi, which are basically an insect species. And you have breaker, elytron, hardshell, and lantern versions of those. So a whole lot of different options for new races that, again, are very much focused on living outside of essentially human-type cities, right? After we get through those new ancestries and the crew of the Zoetrope, there's a techniques and tricks section, which is basically most feats and things like that. We get untamed morphs for barbarians and druids, basically shape-shifting abilities. Ranger feats and warden spells. A section on witches of the wild that includes some patrons, some lessons and feats for witches. Zoophonic bard feats and spells. Zoophonic, so animal sounds,
Nice.
right? Yeah. And then we get some new archetypes. The Beastmaster, the Claw Dancer, the Ostili Host, the Swarm Keeper, the Flippet Contestant, the Weir Creature, so if you want to play a Lycanthrope, Wild Mimic, which is not a D&D style mimic. It's a person who can mimic things out in the wild.
Yes.
I had to read that one twice. And the Winged Warrior, so a fighter who is a member of a species that can fly on their own. And then a whole selection of new spells, again, wild, naturalist type themed. After that, there's a section called Supply Runs, and this talks about animal companions. So if you want to have, a dog or a dolphin or whatever that quickly responds to you and can interact with you, but isn't quite at that level of the awakened animal new ancestry race, then that's certainly an option here. Then there's a grafts section, and I kind of dug this because these are basically living cybernetics, right?
Wow.
So if you want to have, a pair of horns from an animal grafted onto you, or, giant chickens style legs instead of normal human ones. Those are options that are presented here. And then there's a whole gear section with equipment, alchemicals, siege weapons, and spell catalysts. The real meat of the book at this point is kind of the monster manual style section. There's about 70 creatures introduced here over the course of 78 pages. It starts off with some adjustments for amphibious, elite, frostbound, miniature, sandbound, twinner, weak, and winged variants of different creatures. And then you get, like I said, about 70 different creature write-ups here, and includes expanded sections on chimeras. So if you want to swap around what heads might be on your chimera, that's certainly an option. A whole chunk of material on dinosaurs, hydras and different variants of hydras, and then a whole bunch of variants of manticores too. There's others included as well. This is a real chunky section that allows you a lot of ways to customize some of the critters that we already know pretty well from role-playing games into new things that might surprise your players in new and interesting ways. After that, there is a Wardens of the Wild section. And the Wardens of the Wild are kind of these iconic beings, almost like avatars of the very nature of Golarion. And they are the guardians of the air, the sea, the land, and the underworld. There's one for each of those roles, and the Zoetrope encountered each of these and interacted with them a bit. And they're not quite immortal, but they're real hunkin' close, and the impression is that they also have a role, so when one of them is defeated, another being of that same type comes into existence to assume that role. A couple of pages that talk about the conclusion of the Zoetrope's journey, and then a glossary that presents creature references and a detailed map of the Zoetrope. This is, like I said, not a typical way of presenting a role-playing source book, but I really dig it because it's all really well themed, it all fits together, and it kind of sets up either a group that your characters could interact with or a campaign kind of format that your players could replicate, just going off on this mission of exploration to essentially expand knowledge about the world around them.
Yeah, expand knowledge about creatures too. Just like you said, make new creatures,
Yeah,
weird
kind
things.
of a natural history.
Yeah.
It's a cool book. If this sounds like something to be up your alley, we've got copies up here at Immortals Inc. It's $65. It's about 220 pages, hardcover, full color, Paizo Publishing. Lots of cool looking monster artwork and a whole lot of other content in here. Stop by, take a look, or hit us up at immortalsinc.com.
Very well said, good sir. Go check it out right below.
Till next time, folks. Good gaming.